Industrial property, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, has been the number one performing asset class. People like retailers are moving away from having that store on Broadway and Newmarket to delivering direct from the warehouse. So there's been massive demand growth for warehouses like the one we're sitting in now. Everyone said about 12 months ago, survive to 2025. From what we can see, it's going to be the end of 2025. It's still pretty tough out there.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to Shared Lunch. I'm Garth Bray and we're on location with the listed landlord that rents to some of New Zealand's big companies. Property for Industry builds, owns and manages $2 billion worth of factory and warehouse space to some big global names, which also gives investors exposure to property assets without necessarily needing to talk to a mortgage broker. CEO Simon Woodhams has invited us here to East Tamaki to show us 2 stages of development, under construction and already rented, and to share his thoughts on property, industry and the year to come. Before we hear that, some important information you should always consider.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording.
Well, Simon, thanks for inviting us here. I mean, as open homes go, this is pretty extra.
Yeah, it's a pretty big open home, isn't it? 25,000 square metres. So, no, this is the latest facility that we've completed. So we're very, very proud of it. So welcome. Great to have you guys here.
Sure. Property, I guess, as an investment class, it seems like it's something that an investor can kind of touch, feel, maybe understand a little bit more. Is that fair?
Yes, yep, definitely. So we've got 4,500 retail investors, and I think for a lot of them, particularly the ones that have been with us for 25 years plus, the fact that it's bricks and mortars, there's actually a physical aspect to it, is a really important aspect to why they invest with us. It's certainly why myself and a lot of the team have been involved for a long time. We like to be able to create things and physically touch it. So no, I think that's probably one of the more important aspects of PFI. Yep.
So where are we right now? And who's moved in, who's moving in?
So we're at what we call 78 Springs Road. So this is the Fisher and Paykel appliance site. This is a 10.5 hectare site. So if you think of rugby fields as an analogy, 10 rugby fields. We brought this site 15 years ago from Fisher and Paykel in what they call a sale and leaseback transaction. So we bought the whole site off it and they wrote a 15-year lease to stay on the site and rent the buildings that we had. Originally, they used to manufacture the appliances, so I think refrigerators, washing machines, dryers on the site. About 13 years ago, Haier, the big Chinese manufacturer, brought Fisher and Paykel, and they went to a slightly different model where they manufacture offshore, and they were using the buildings here to distribute. So they'd be built in Mexico or Thailand, arrive here in Auckland, be stored here, and then shot out to the Nolan ends of the world. About 4 years ago, we started talking to the Fisher and Paykel appliances exec team, and with that change in business model they needed what we call a distribution centre, a DC. And yeah, we got into building this. So this is a state-of-the-art 25,000 square metre DC centre. It's sustainably, it's 5 Green Star rated, so it's got all the bells and whistles in terms of solar, rainwater harvesting, electric charges you can see out there, and they've moved in and committed to another 15 years. So for us, it's an ongoing 30-year commitment, which is pretty pleasing.
That 30-year commitment, is that a typical sort of investment horizon for PFI, or is that a bit longer?
So our portfolio, we've got 90 properties, predominantly here in Auckland. It's valued at just over $2 billion. Our average weighted lease term is 5.5 years. When we build new like this, it's a big commitment both for ourselves but also for the tenant. So you tend to get a longer lease term up front. Other recent developments have been 12 and 15 years. So it's pretty common to get 10 years plus on that first initial commitment. So yeah, typical for the new builds.
But you are potentially now looking at stuff that you're not going to actually get to the end of its life cycle or get to the end of its tenancy until the middle of the next decade kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, we'd like to think this building's fit for purpose for the next 50 to 60 years. You don't want to be knocking buildings down and rebuilding them if they're perfectly good. So the design features that have gone in here is with the intention it needs to be 50 years plus. So yeah, we're a long-term company. We've been around for 30 years. We celebrated 30 years being listed last year on the NZX, so there's not many companies that can say that. And so every sort of decision that we make has that long-term sort of view to it, which is, again, part of the attraction of investing in property.
And PFI, so you're not an REIT?
No, but it's a very common, when they talk about REITs, they're talking about listed property vehicles. So some people have different structures. Ours is a simple limited liability company.
How does that fundamentally differ from someone taking a direct investment, becoming a landlord themselves, investing in...
I think scale, really. A lot of your investors at Sharesies will have a few $100s to invest. The valuation on this building on completion is over $100 million. So as a landlord, very few people have access to that type of product. And even what we would consider a smaller asset, our average asset size is about $20 million. So again, the type of investor that can take that on personally is a very small part of the population. So by having a limited liability company with a portfolio of assets, it allows the investor to own a share in a wide variety of buildings and tenants. So we've got close to 130 different tenants. A lot of them are government tenants or listed companies or international companies that sit within the portfolio. So it's a very low risk, secure investment is how we would describe ourselves.
Because you're diversified across not just one site, but across different
tenants,
different cities around the country.
Yep. So we're 85% here in Auckland, but we've got property in Tauranga, Napier, Christchurch, Wellington, New Plymouth. So yeah, it is diversified by that. But 85% based here in Auckland, which is the biggest, deepest, strongest market in our view. So yeah, pretty comfortable with that split.
I'll get on to your take on that shortly. But in terms of the investment, I suppose a little more liquid than literally owning a share or outright in a property too.
Yeah, exactly. And by being listed, you can trade your share on a daily basis. You can price it on a daily basis. So a lot of the property investments you see out there, if you want to buy a building by yourself, and if you need to realise money, it takes a while to advertise the building, sell the building, settle the building. You've got property syndication, which is a next step down where you buy one building with a group of investors. But same thing, if you want to get your money out quickly, it can take a little bit of time. Whereas the New Zealand Stock Exchange trades 5 days a week. You've
got some experience in that unlisted property sector as well, haven't you? What are the advantages, I suppose, compared to the costs and compliance of floating?
That's probably touching a little bit on the history of PFI. So PFI was originally set up in the early 90s by the original guy, Malcolm McDougall, who sold the management business that was running the portfolio at the time to AMP Capital in Australia. In 1997, I think it was. And Malcolm then moved to Auckland. He was based in Wellington and set up another company called Direct Property Fund. And that was an unlisted fund where they had a series of investors who built up a portfolio of assets, and that's where I got involved. So I turned up in 2003. Worked for Malcolm, another guy, Greg Reedy, and we grew that company to about $400 million. And then in late 2010, Greg jumped on a plane over to Australia and convinced AMP Capital to sell the management contract for PFI to our group of investors. So for a couple of years, we ran an unlisted fund, which has benefits in that there's not as much compliance, there's no listing regulations, etc. And we ran PFI as well, side by side, and then we merged the companies together in 2013, and that created a sort of an entity of $750 million, which we've grown reasonably aggressively over the last decade through to where we are today, $2.1 billion. And it's pleasing to say, we regularly get emails and people turning up to the AGM of investors in PFI who've been there for the full 30 years. It's incredible.
You sound like you understand them pretty well and what it is that those PFI investors want. Is it a more conservative proposition than a growth or a balance kind of a thing? Is it a chasing the income from the dividend stream rather than the capital growth?
Yeah, we call ourselves a dividend stock, so a dividend company. So people tend to invest into both unlisted property and listed property, so PFI, for a regular dividend. So we pay a quarterly dividend and have done for 30 years. We've managed to grow that dividend over that period of time. So currently our dividend's about 4.5% per annum. And then on top of that, we've had capital growth throughout the period as well. So first and foremost, we say invest for the dividends. And then secondly, the capital growth is the icing on top. But if you look at it over the 30 years, we've done total returns per annum of around 9.5%. So it's been a pretty good ride. The last 3 or 4 years has been a bit tougher as interest rates have gone the way they have, growing. But in terms of valuations, etc., we've seen them stabilise in the last 6 to 12 months, and hopefully in the near future will start to grow away. That's the plan.
You're not the only players in this game.
No.
How do you compare against the competition? How do you rate yourselves?
Yeah, so I think there's about 10 listed entities on the NZX who we compare ourselves to. I guess one of the key strategic difference with PFI is we focus solely on industrial property. There's another competitor out there who do the same and do it very well. Industrial property, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, has been the number one performing asset class. And by asset class, the other asset classes are, obviously there's residential, there's commercial, so you think office towers, there's shopping centres, and then there's health assets. So they're the main asset classes in New Zealand. And industrial property, both on a rental growth and on a capital growth point of view, in the last decade has been number one by a long way. So
you picked the right horse.
So there's some themes there that have played into our, particularly in and around the COVID area. So if you look at e-commerce is a big one. So people like retailers are moving away from having that store on Broadway and Newmarket to delivering direct from the warehouse. So there's been massive demand growth for warehouses like the one we're sitting in here now, direct to consumer DC distribution centres. So that's played into our hands.
So because at the moment I would have thought most bricks and mortar investment into any other kind of space, if it's office space, you're seeing people being sort of begged to return to the office.
Yeah.
You must be looking at that going, crikey, glad we're not into that too much or at all.
Yeah, we're not in that at all, which, we're happy about that. I think what you're seeing in the office sector is you're seeing with the work from home thematic, that there's no doubt that's, in my view, that won't change. But the prime stuff, the A-grade offices are doing very, very well because people have to attract their staff back into the office. But the B and C grade stuff, the city fringe stuff, that's struggling. There's, the stats will tell you that. So again, work from home, that's a thematic that's played into. It's pretty hard to run a warehouse from home. You need people in the office, in the warehouse. So
the more online we are, and the more we are moving away from traditional sort of retail and stuff, the better you'd say your position is.
Well, it's definitely a thematic that supports us. Yeah. Your original question was, how do we differentiate ourselves? By being solely focused on industrial. That has played into our hands. The team that we've built over the last decade, we call ourselves industrial specialists, and that's all we do. So we don't do healthcare assets, we don't do residential, we're all focused and know this market particularly well. So that has been a strength of ours.
Let's talk a bit about the market and some of the people that you're dealing with in it. I imagine with 120 odd?
Yeah, 130 tenants, yep.
130 tenants, mostly industrial. You'd be getting a pretty good sounding on how our economy is working at the moment right now, where the pressures are, where the opportunities are. Am I right?
Yeah, we call ourselves a bit of a bellwether really by having that many tenants, and they're all in different industries. So we've got, kitchen manufacturers next door, who manufacture kitchens. So when the residential market's struggling, these guys, we hear about it from those guys. When the residential market's doing really well, they're building wardrobes and laundry systems and kitchens, so we know that's doing well. We've got logistics companies that move freight around New Zealand, all over New Zealand, from DHL to Move Logistics, Main Freight, all the big guys. So we're tapped into this network of people that give us what's happening at the coalface.
Give us the goss then, 2025?
2025. I think everyone said about 12 months ago, survive to 2025. From what we can see, it's going to be the end of 2025. It's still pretty tough out there. But there's definitely some positivity, I think. I think there's a bit of hope from a political point of view that some of the rhetoric that you've been hearing the last 3 to 6 months will start to see some action towards the middle of this year. Interest rates is a big driver of the property market. As they go up, property prices tend to go down. Everyone's watching what's going to happen at the end of February with Reserve Bank. Will there be a 50-point basis cut or more or less? There's some thematics there. The labour force, if you went back 3 years, a regular comment was we can't get good staff. Towards the middle of last year, it was how do we hold on to our good staff, as in, we're downsizing. So, I think there's a bit more pain to go through in the next 6 to 9 months. But looking at our tenant base, a lot of them are large businesses that have been around for a long time and do invest for the long term. I mean, Fisher and Paykel, they've signed a 15-year lease with us, so they're planning on being around for the long term, which is really good. Next door, we've got another development. You can see the diggers working on it already, which is another company, MyTech, who have signed on for 12 years. So that building down there will be finished towards the end of next year. So there are companies making long-term decisions and looking through the cycle. So for us, it's a question of, in our view, quality attracts quality. If we can get the product right in the right areas, then we should still continue to attract good quality tenants, which will ensure good cash flow, which means we can carry on paying a growing dividend to our shareholders.
Yeah, I think in your last results you were talking about PFI effectively, I think undercharging, is that the right way to put it? That you under-rented,
yeah.
16%. That means there's extra value that you could be. That relies on the ability of your tenants to be financially healthy enough and see the way forward to pay that. So
exactly right. So it comes back to the quality of your tenant, I guess. So we call it an under-renting. So when you sign a long-term lease, it's not unusual to have what we call fixed rent reviews. So for instance, the lease we've done with Fisher and Paykel here, every year the rent increases by a certain amount, and that's to try and stop neither the landlord or the tenant being in a position where you're out of market, where you're heavily under rented or heavily over rented. It's got to be fair for both parties. And what we've found in the last 3 years, particularly since COVID, is in the industrial property market anyway, there's been massive rental growth. So we're seeing rents go up 10-15% per annum. So if you haven't had a rent review for 3 years, you could be 30 to 45% under rented. And so you have this rent review mechanism within the lease, which allows you to bring the rent back up to a market. And conversely, if they're over rented, it brings the rent back down, so the tenant benefits there.
So 16% achievable?
So across our portfolio, that's what the valuers are saying. We're under rented. Again, it's when do you get access to that? When's the timing of that rent coming through? But yeah, the last couple of years we've been achieving a lot more than that in certain cases. So we had catch-up rent reviews effectively, or new leases. So yeah, we're pretty confident. If you look through our tenant profile, again, businesses like Mainfreight, Fisher and Paykel Appliances, DHL, these are big companies. They know the trends on what's happening in the market. One way you could say it is it's under-rented, but it could also, you could turn around and say to the tenant, well, you've benefited over the last 3 years from not paying the market rent. And as long as you're having these conversations early on in the piece and do it in a respectful manner, then yeah, it seems to be readily achievable, which is good.
We were talking about interest rates before. Do you have a personal view, given where things are going? Do you claim any greater knowledge from listening to the people that you talk to?
I think if you went back 6 months, when they started cutting the interest rates, it was a bit of a surprise, and now everyone's thinking they're going to go very, very low. I think what's happened in the last 2 to 3 months, if you look what's happening offshore in America, etc., they might not go as low as people think they're going to go, and it might take a bit longer to get them down there. So there's still a little bit of inflation floating around. I know our headline inflation's at 2.1, but rates, insurance, that non-tradable inflation's still pretty strong. So yeah, for what it's worth, Adrian Orr seems to march to the beat of his own drum, rightly or wrongly. So yeah, I don't think it's a dead cert that it's going to fall away aggressively over the next 12 months.
And no idea how long it'll stay low either.
No idea, yeah. And that's why if you look at the leases that we sign, they have these fixed growth built into them. We have these opportunities to review the leases to market. And that primarily that's not just for the landlord, it's for both parties, the landlord and the tenant. You've got to try and keep those rents at or around market. It doesn't really benefit anyone. In the short term, it sounds great, you're getting these big rent reviews, but it just means you haven't been at market for the 2 or 3 years earlier. And then if you're overcharging your tenant, that's not a great scenario either. It just means at some point they'll be looking around. So yeah, it's got to be fair for both parties.
Australia as a market or as a potential place to invest for property, has that ever crossed your minds?
We've looked at it in the past, it's fair to say. And At times it's been attractive depending on exchange rates. There's a tax regime that at times looks quite attractive. But what we've found is a little bit of stick to your knitting. There's some big boys in Australia that live there, breathe there, have operated there for a long time. Particularly in Auckland, it's a pretty big market here, and we think there's plenty of opportunities here. So you've really we want to knock it out of the park here in Auckland and New Zealand first and foremost, but never say never. As part of a portfolio acquisition or a partnership with a company that goes offshore, we wouldn't say no. So
let's bring it back right here where we are now then. So this is a Green Star building, you were saying. What does that mean?
So the New Zealand Green Building Council has a rating system. So we've designed the building. So right at the start, you make the decision with all your consultants, your architects, your engineers that you want it to be rated by the Green Building Council. And there's a series of points that you achieve on the way through in design, in the recycling of the materials that you take away from the site, and then the finished product. And as I said earlier, it's things like you get points for solar power, for rainwater harvesting, electric charges out there. And depending on how many points you get, you need 60 points to achieve 5 green stars. And so this building at the moment is sitting on about 64. So
who's asking for that?
It's a global thing, is what we're seeing. So sustainability, I don't need to lecture people on that. But globally, what we've seen from both tenants, from insurance companies, from finance, and governments, it's been pushed onto people over probably the last decade effectively, but it's ramped up. We've seen it ramped up probably in the last 6 or 7 years. And we made a decision about 4 years ago that we wanted to be at the forefront of it, and we wanted to be part of the group that is now heading down that track and leading the market in that. So any development we've done in the last 3 years has been targeting that 5 Green Star development. We've just finished another one in Mount Wellington, 2 large buildings. Again, $100 million plus, and they're 5 Green Star rated. And we're looking into a model whereby our existing buildings we can start to get ratings. So there's a group of us working with the Green Building Council to establish a regime on how do you take an existing building and get a rating. And eventually where we'll get to is tenants will be able to go, right, we want to go into a 4 Green Star rating or a 5 Green Star, and there'll be a rental premium to come into a good building, is our view. That's where it's going to do it. It's already there in the office buildings. You're starting to see one of the agencies, Jones Lang LaSalle, did a research note middle of last year. It's between 6 and 7% premium rents going into a Green Star rated building. So eventually what will happen is the tenants will have a choice between Green Star, non-Green Star. They'll pay a different price. And we think to be at the forefront, you want to be in the Green Star rated buildings.
Are we at the forefront here from the government's point of view in terms of setting the playing field for this kind of stuff? Because I understood there's a bit of a drift there. They decided maybe they weren't going to press ahead with some of those regulations. Does that make it harder, easier?
It costs more to build a Green Star rated building, so you've got to have access to capital. The compliance regime's pretty tough. So are the settings right? There's probably room for improvement, but at the moment, just even getting hold of consultants that are Green Star accredited is quite tough. So, as the market develops, there'll be more people attracted into that, and I think you'll start to see, that right itself. The residential market, you're starting to see, it gain a foothold there. So it will flow through. I think industrial, we always talking about being the asset class out the back, getting the work done. No one really sees it. It's very rare that you see a big shiny warehouse on the front page of the Herald, but you open a shopping centre or an IKEA or a set of flats and it's up in lights, which is fine by us. We're very happy being off the front page of the Herald, but that's the reality. So I think the industrial class is probably just out the back a little bit, but time will catch it. And as I said earlier, and we're seeing in terms of finance, you talk about finance, Green Star rated buildings, you can get cheaper finance. So it's starting to go that way. And I think it'll only speed up as more and more of us push into it. And most of it, go back to one of your original questions around the listed competitors, you jump on the websites, all the listed guys are into it now, understand it and are pushing into it. So it's here, it's not going away.
Some would say we're in probably arguably the worst recession since 1991, which is as long as I can remember anyway, maybe you too. I don't know whether you agree with that statement, but so if you finish this sentence, then now is the right time for PFI to be
doing exactly what we're doing, really. So we've got a portfolio of assets that are really well located. Portfolio's been built over 30 years. We've got a lot of inherent opportunities that sit within the portfolio. An example is exactly here. This was a underutilised site, but in the middle of East Tamaki, 10 hectares. And so we've, in pretty tough times, we've removed the building, we've built a world-class facility leased to a world-class tenant on budget, under time, ahead of schedule. So stick to our knitting. We've got plenty of opportunities within the portfolio that we're accessing, and so as a shareholder, you will enjoy the benefit of that going forward.
What about your runway?
Really enjoy what I do. We've built a great team. There's 26 of us that sit in an office back in the city, but we all enjoy getting out to the sites, meeting with the tenants. You hear about their businesses, about their livelihoods, what they're doing, some good, some really good, some maybe not so good, but it's a real people's person sort of industry, and that's something that I've always enjoyed. Whilst we've got a young team that sort of want to keep going, hopefully we can put projects in front of them and keep developing PFI. When we bought the management contract, it was a $340 million portfolio. It's now about to click over 2.1 billion. So, it's been an area that we've enjoyed some really good success. So I'm looking forward to some more.
Better never stops, eh?
Exactly right. Better never stops.
Good place to leave it. Thanks for watching and for listening. If you're watching, you're probably on YouTube. If you're listening, you're on Spotify, Apple or iHeart. Wherever you are, tell us what you think and tell us what you'd like to hear about or see next. For now, that's us on Shared Lunch. Ko mutu.